In a city like many others in America, life was always moving fast. People were busy with work, school, families, and trying to make ends meet. But not everyone saw the city the same way. For some, it was safe and full of opportunities. For others, especially people of color, it could feel like a place where you had to watch your back, even when doing nothing wrong. The city's police department was under pressure. There had been stories in the news about bad behavior by officers. Too many stops without reason, too many arrests that seemed unfair, and sometimes even violence caught on video. People were angry. They wanted change. They wanted trust. And they wanted justice. Inside this city's police headquarters, there were many different kinds of officers. Some were young and eager to help. Others were older and tired, just trying to do their job and go home. Among them was Officer Daniel Whitmore, a man who had spent over 20 years in uniform. Whitmore wasn't a bad guy, at least not in the way most people would think. He showed up on time, did his rounds, followed orders, and never broke any rules. Why, at least not on paper. But if you listened closely to the things he said behind closed doors, or watched how he treated certain people during traffic stops, you might start to see another side of him. He was known among some of his co-workers as someone who didn't hide his views. He made jokes that weren't really jokes. He talked about how things used to be better, before everything changed. He believed that crime was higher in certain neighborhoods because of the people who lived there, not because of poverty, lack of education, or poor government support. In his mind, it was just the way things were. But he never said these things, out loud in public. He knew the world was changing. He knew cameras were everywhere now, so he played it smart. He stayed within the lines, but only just barely, and most of the time, no one called him out on it. Then there was Marcus Ellison. Marcus was very different from Whitmore. Though both wore the same badge, Marcus was tall, calm, and always dressed neatly. He spoke in a quiet voice, but when he talked, people listened. He wasn't flashy or loud. He didn't chase headlines or try to be a hero. Instead, he worked behind the scenes, making sure that the department ran fairly and honestly. Marcus had grown up in the city. He knew its streets. Well, the good ones and the bad ones. As a teenager, he had seen what happened when police didn't care enough to listen. He remembered watching friends get stopped for no reason, questioned, searched, and sometimes even arrested for small mistakes. It made him angry. But instead of giving up on the system, he decided to fix it. That's why he became a cop, not to control people, but to protect them. And after years of hard work, he rose through the ranks until he reached a powerful position, Chief of Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs is the part of the police department that investigates other officers. If someone breaks the rules, it's Marcus's job to find out the truth and make sure justice is done, even if it means punishing his own colleagues. It's not a popular job. Most cops don't like being watched. But Marcus didn't care about popularity. He cared about fairness. He knew that if the department was going to earn back the trust of the community, it had to clean up its own house first. So every day, Marcus walked into the station knowing that some people respected him, but many others feared him. He was fair but firm. He didn't play favorites. And he didn't let anyone off the hook just because they wore the same uniform. One evening, after a long day of meetings and paperwork, Marcus got into his car and drove home. He took a shortcut through a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people left their windows open and kids played outside until dark. He wasn't speeding. He was driving calmly, listening to soft jazz on the radio. The sun was setting, and the sky was turning orange. Everything felt peaceful. But then, suddenly, flashing lights appeared in his rearview mirror. A patrol car was pulling him over. Marcus blinked. He checked his speed. He was exactly at the limit. He hadn't swerved or broken any traffic laws. He looked in the mirror again. The officer stepping out of the car was Daniel Whitmore. Whitmore approached the driver's side window with a serious look on his face. "Evening," he said. "Good evening," Marcus replied politely. "You know why I pulled you over?" Whitmore asked. "No, I don't," Marcus said, keeping his tone calm. Whitmore looked at him for a moment. Then, he said, "You were driving too slow." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Too slow?" "That's right," Whitmore said. "Can I see your license and registration, please?" Marcus nodded slowly. He reached for his wallet and pulled out his ID and license. Then, before handing them over, he looked straight at Whitmore and asked, "Do you know who I am?" Whitmore gave a small smirk. "Doesn't matter who you are. You're still breaking the law." Marcus didn't smile. He handed over the documents. Whitmore looked down at them. His eyes scanned the name. Then they widened slightly, because on the ID, under the photo, it clearly said, Marcus Ellison, Chief of Internal Affairs. There was a long pause. Whitmore's face changed. The confidence gone, replaced by something else. Surprise? Fear? He looked back at Marcus, unsure of what to say next. And just like that, a routine traffic stop turned into something much bigger. The air between Marcus Ellison and Officer Daniel Whitmore felt heavier now. It was still quiet outside, no loud noises, no sirens, just the soft hum of the city settling down for the night. But inside that car, something had changed. Whitmore stared at the ID card in his hand like it had just told him a secret he wasn't ready to hear. His face didn't show anger or excitement. It showed surprise, maybe even fear. He looked back at Marcus, who sat calmly behind the wheel. No sign of panic, no raised voice. Just steady eyes, waiting. "Chief Ellison?" Whitmore said slowly, almost like he hoped he had read it wrong. "That's right," Marcus replied, keeping his voice level. "You pulled over the head of Internal Affairs." For a second, Whitmore didn't say anything. He just stood there, holding the documents like they were about to burn him. Then he took a small step back, looking around as if hoping someone else would come help him out of this moment. Behind them, the neighborhood was peaceful. A dog barked somewhere far off. A porch light turned on. Life was going on as usual, but not for these two men. Whitmore cleared his throat. "I didn't know it was you, I figured," Marcus said. "That's kind of the point." Whitmore blinked. "Sir?" Marcus sighed quietly. "You stopped me because I was driving too slow?" "Yes," Whitmore answered quickly, like he needed to remind himself why he had done it. "That's what I saw. That's why I pulled you over." "You didn't see my face until after you made the stop?" Marcus asked. "No, sir," Whitmore admitted. "So you had no idea who I was," Marcus said again. "And yet you decided to pull me over for driving too slow, in the middle of a quiet neighborhood, at night." Whitmore shifted his weight. "It's my job to enforce the law." "And I respect that," Marcus said. "But tell me, Officer Whitmore, how often do you pull over white drivers for driving too slow? Did you ever question whether I might have been a city official, a judge, or even another officer?" Whitmore opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. Then he tried again. "Like I said, it doesn't matter who you are. If you break the law, you get stopped." "But did I break the law?" Marcus asked. "Or did you just decide I looked suspicious?" There was silence again. Whitmore looked at Marcus, trying to find an answer that wouldn't make things worse. But deep down, he already knew. This wasn't just a mistake. It was more than that. It was profiling. He had seen a black man driving through a mostly white neighborhood late at night, and instead of giving him the benefit of the doubt, he had assumed something was wrong. He had let his own beliefs affect his judgment, even if he didn't want to admit it. Marcus could see the thoughts running through Whitmore's mind. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He just waited. Finally, Whitmore handed back the documents. "Well, since you're who you are, I'll let you go with a warning." "That's very generous," Marcus said, taking the papers. "But I'm going to need your badge number." Whitmore froze. "What for?" "To file a report," Marcus said simply. Now it was Whitmore's turn to blink in surprise. "A report?" "That's right," Marcus said. "I believe I was, targeted based on my race. And as Chief of Internal Affairs, it's my duty to investigate every complaint, including ones that involve me personally." Whitmore's face went pale. "Come on, sir. You can't be serious." "I am," Marcus said. "This isn't personal. But it does matter, because if I, a high-ranking officer, can be pulled over without cause, imagine what everyday citizens go through." Whitmore looked like he wanted to argue, but he couldn't find the words, so he just gave Marcus his badge number silently. Marcus wrote it down and nodded. "Thank you, officer. Have a good evening." Then he rolled up his window, put the car in gear, and drove away. Whitmore watched him go, standing alone in the street, the red and blue lights still blinking behind him. He felt like the whole world had suddenly gotten smaller. The next day, word spread fast through the police station. Someone had pulled over Marcus Ellison, the head of Internal Affairs, for no real reason, and now Ellison himself was filing a formal complaint. At first, some officers thought it was a joke. Others whispered that Marcus was making a big deal out of nothing. But then people started asking questions. How did this happen? Why did Whitmore pull him over? Was it really about the speed? Soon the department began talking about more than just one officer's mistake. They started talking about bias, about trust, about fairness. And all of it started with one simple traffic stop. Inside Internal Affairs, Marcus sat at his desk, looking at the report he had just finished writing. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel proud. He just felt like he was doing his job. Because sometimes the truth doesn't knock on your door. Sometimes it pulls you over on the side of the road and forces you to look at yourself. And when that happens, you have two choices: deny it or learn from it. Whitmore hadn't chosen yet, but soon he would have to. The morning after the traffic stop, the police station was buzzing with whispers. It started in the locker room. Then it moved to the break room. By the time officers lined up for roll call, everyone knew what had happened. Officer Daniel Whitmore had pulled over Marcus Ellison, the head of Internal Affairs, late at night for no good reason. And now Ellison had filed a formal complaint. Some officers didn't believe it at first. "Wait, you're saying he actually wrote himself a report?" one officer asked, half laughing. Another shook his head. "No joke, it's real." But for others, this wasn't funny. They knew Marcus Ellison didn't do things for show. He didn't play favorites. He didn't let rank protect anyone, not even himself. Inside the Internal Affairs office, Marcus sat at his desk, looking through files like nothing unusual had happened. But deep down, he knew this was far from normal. He had seen cases like this before, complaints from citizens who said they were unfairly stopped or treated badly by officers. Most of the time, those complaints never made it past paperwork. But now, for the first time, Marcus himself was part of the story, and that changed everything. Whitmore, faces, the music. Daniel Whitmore arrived at work later than usual that day. His face looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. He kept his head low as he walked into the station, avoiding eye contact with other officers. He had known Marcus Ellison was powerful, but now he realized just how much power the man really had. By mid-morning, Whitmore was called into a meeting with the deputy chief. No one told him what it was about, but he already knew. When he entered the small office, the deputy chief was waiting with a serious look on his face. "Officer Whitmore," he began, "you pulled over Chief Ellison last night, correct?" "Yes, sir," Whitmore replied, standing straight. "And you've been informed that he has filed a formal complaint against you?" "I have, sir," Whitmore said, keeping his voice calm. The deputy chief leaned back in his chair and studied Whitmore for a moment. "Do you understand why this is a big deal?" Whitmore nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." "You're under investigation now," the deputy said. "Internal Affairs will be reviewing your actions." Whitmore swallowed hard. "Understood, sir." As he left the office, he felt like the whole world was watching him. Like every pair of eyes in the station could see the shame on his face. Because now, it wasn't just about a traffic stop. It was about something bigger. It was about race. It was about trust. And now, it was about accountability. Marcus takes charge. Back in his office, Marcus had already begun working on the case. This wasn't personal, at least not to him. He had trained himself long ago not to take these things personally. That was the only way to stay fair. Still, he couldn't ignore the pattern. He pulled up Whitmore's file. Over the years, there had been a few complaints. Nothing serious, but enough to raise eyebrows. Mostly from black drivers who said they were stopped without cause. Some claimed they were searched without permission. None of them had led to discipline, mostly because there wasn't enough evidence. Until now, Marcus assigned 2 investigators to the case. He made sure they understood that this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. "We don't go easy on him because he's one of us," Marcus told them. "And we don't come down harder just because I'm involved. We find out what happened, and we follow the facts." One of the younger investigators nodded. "Understood, Chief." Marcus gave a small smile. "Good, let's get to work." Tensions rise in the department. Word of the investigation spread quickly. Some officers supported Marcus. They thought it was important that even high-ranking officers followed the rules. Others weren't so sure. In the lunchroom, a group of officers sat together talking quietly. "This is ridiculous," one of them muttered. "He's making a big deal out of nothing." Another shook his head. "You don't know what happened. Maybe it was wrong." "Oh, come on," the first officer snapped. "So he got pulled over. Happens to all of us. Why does it matter who he is?" A third officer, older and more experienced, finally spoke up. "It matters because if someone like him can be profiled, imagine what regular people go through." That shut the conversation down for a minute. Outside the station, the community was also reacting. Local news picked up the story. Social media posts started going viral. People were sharing their own stories of being unfairly stopped by police. One post read, "If even the head of Internal Affairs isn't safe from profiling, how are the rest of us supposed to feel protected?" Another wrote, "This isn't just about one officer, it's about the system." Soon, community leaders reached out to Marcus, asking for a meeting. They wanted to talk about reform. They wanted to talk about trust. And most of all, they wanted to know if change was really possible. Whitmore starts to understand. Meanwhile, Whitmore sat alone in his car outside the station, trying to make sense of everything. He kept replaying the moment over and over in his head. The stop, the ID, the badge, and the look on Marcus Ellison's face. Calm, but firm. Whitmore had always believed he was doing the right thing. He had spent his whole career enforcing the law. He had always thought of himself as fair. But now, he wasn't so sure. He remembered growing up in a small town where cops were heroes, where people trusted the badge. He had joined the force because he wanted to help people. But somewhere along the way, maybe he had picked up some bad habits. Maybe he had learned to see the world in black and white, literally. He thought about the jokes he used to tell with other officers, about how certain neighborhoods were trouble, about how some people just didn't respect authority. Now those jokes didn't seem funny anymore. Now they felt like a mirror. And for the first time, Whitmore didn't like what he saw. Third investigation begins. Back at Internal Affairs, the team gathered body camera footage from Whitmore's patrol car. The video showed everything. The moment he pulled Marcus over, the questions he asked, the way he stood by the window. There was no yelling, no violence, just a quiet moment that carried huge meaning. The investigators reviewed the footage carefully. Then came the interviews. Other officers were questioned about Whitmore's behavior. Drivers who had been stopped by him in the past were contacted. Patterns began to appear. More than once, Whitmore had pulled over black drivers for minor infractions, sometimes for no clear reason at all. And now, with Marcus Ellison leading the charge, the department couldn't ignore it anymore. The weight of the moment. For Marcus, the hardest part wasn't the paperwork or the meetings, it was the pressure. Everyone was watching now. Officers, community members, reporters. Some wanted justice. Others wanted silence. And Marcus? He just wanted the truth. He sat in his office late one night, staring at the report on his desk. He thought about his own life. Growing up in the city, seeing friends treated unfairly, deciding to become a cop not to control people but to protect them. He thought about the long road ahead. This one case wouldn't fix everything. But maybe, just maybe, it would start something. Maybe it would remind people that no one is above the law, not even the ones who wear the badge. And maybe, just maybe, it would teach an old dog new tricks. The day had finally come. Inside the city's Internal Affairs hearing room, the air was thick with tension. It wasn't a courtroom, but it felt just as serious. A long wooden table stretched across the center of the room. At one end sat Marcus Ellison, calm and composed in his uniform, flipping through a stack of reports. On the other side sat Officer Daniel Whitmore, stiff-backed and quiet, trying not to look at anyone directly. Around them were witnesses, investigators, and a few members of the press who had been allowed to observe, quietly. This wasn't a trial, but for Whitmore it felt like one. Behind closed doors, this was where truth would meet consequence. The room filled with eyes. As the meeting began, Marcus looked up from his notes and scanned the room. He saw familiar faces. Some officers he had worked with for years, others who avoided eye contact when they saw him walk in. He also saw people from the community. Activists, local leaders, even a few citizens who had filed complaints against Whitmore in the past. They weren't here to cheer or protest. They were here to watch, to see if justice would be done. Marcus cleared his throat and stood up slowly. "We are here today," he began, "to review the events surrounding a traffic stop involving myself and Officer Daniel Whitmore. This is not about revenge. It is not about power. It is about fairness." He paused, letting the words settle. This department must earn back the trust of the people we serve. And that begins by holding ourselves accountable, even when it's hard. There was silence. Then he nodded to the lead investigator sitting beside him. "Let's begin." The evidence speaks. The first part of the hearing was quiet and professional. Investigators presented body camera footage, police logs, and witness statements. Everyone watched as the video played on the large screen at the front of the room. It showed the moment clearly, Whitmore pulling over Marcus's car late at night, asking for license and registration, saying the reason was driving too slow. No real cause, no visible danger, just a gut feeling. Then came the moment everyone remembered best. The pause after Marcus handed over his ID. The look on Whitmore's face when he realized who he had stopped. The video didn't lie. After the footage, the team shared data. Over the last 5 years, Whitmore had pulled over black drivers at a rate far higher than white drivers, even though crime statistics in the area didn't support the difference. In many cases, the stops led to no arrests, no charges, and no findings of wrongdoing. They were just stops. And now, Seeing the pattern laid out so clearly, even some of Whitmore's supporters in the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Voices from the past. Next came the interviews. One by one, people who had been stopped by Whitmore in the past took turns speaking. Some were nervous, others were angry, all were honest. A young man named Jamal Harris stood up. "I was driving home from work," he said. "I wasn't speeding. I hadn't broken any laws. But he pulled me over. Anyway, said my taillight was out. When I asked why he didn't just flash his lights instead of pulling me over, he got defensive." Another woman, Maria Sanchez, said, "He made me get out of the car because I looked nervous." I was tired, not nervous. Each story added another layer to the picture. Whitmore sat there, listening. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the edge of the table. He wanted to argue. He wanted to explain. But every time he opened his mouth, he found nothing to say. Because deep down, he knew. This wasn't just about one bad stop. This was about how he had seen the world for years and how wrong he had been. Whitmore takes the stand. Finally, it was Whitmore's turn to speak. He stood up slowly, adjusting his uniform like it could somehow make him feel stronger. "I've served this department for over 20 years, he began. "I've always believed in the law, in doing what's right." He looked at Marcus, then at the crowd. "I didn't mean to do anything wrong that night. I saw someone driving too slow. I pulled them over. That's my job." A pause. "But I realize now, maybe I let my own beliefs affect my actions more than I thought." That line hung in the air like smoke. Some people exchanged looks. Others leaned forward, surprised. Marcus watched him carefully. "You're saying you think your beliefs affected how you did your job?" Marcus asked. Whitmore swallowed. "Yes, I think maybe I've been trained to look for trouble in certain places, and sometimes I might have seen it where it wasn't." It was the closest thing to an apology anyone had heard from him, and it mattered, because admitting fault, even in small steps, is the start of change. Marcus shares the truth. Marcus stood up again, looking at everyone in the room. "This case isn't just about one officer," he said. "It's about all of us, about how we see each other, about how we treat people before we even know who they are." He looked at Whitmore. "You didn't just pull over a driver that night. You pulled over someone who has spent his life fighting to make this department better. And in doing so, you showed exactly why we still have so far to go." He turned back to the room. "We can't keep pretending these patterns don't exist. We can't keep blaming victims for being targeted. If we want to earn back the trust of the people we serve, we have to start by cleaning up our own house." His voice was strong, but not angry. It was firm, but fair. And when he sat back down, the room stayed silent for a full 10 seconds. The moment that changed everything. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Inside, something else was ending. For Marcus, this hearing was a chance to show that accountability wasn't about punishment. It was about growth. For Whitmore, it was a wake-up call. He had spent his whole career believing he was doing the right thing. Now he had to ask himself a harder question. Was he doing the best thing? Could he change? Would he try? He didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time, he was asking the questions, and that, in itself, was progress. The decision is coming. The hearing ended late that evening. Papers were signed. Notes were collected. And soon, a final decision would be made. But already something had shifted. Not just in the department, but in the city, because now, people could see that even the most powerful officers were held to account. Even the most experienced cops could learn new lessons, and even the deepest wounds could begin to heal, one honest conversation at a time. Absolutely. Here is the expanded version of Part 5, written in simple English, around 2,000 words, and designed to be interesting, emotional, and easy to understand. This is the final part of the story, where everything comes together: the consequences, the lessons learned, and the changes that follow. Part 5. The Resolution. Aftermath. Expanded. The decision came down a week after the hearing. Officer Daniel Whitmore was suspended without pay for 2 months. He wasn't fired, but he wasn't let off easy either. The department ruled that his actions had violated policy by pulling Marcus Ellison over without clear cause. His behavior had shown bias, even if unintentional, and because of that, discipline was necessary. When the news hit the station, reactions were mixed. Some officers thought it was too harsh. Others said it wasn't enough. But outside the station, in the city, people noticed. They saw that something had changed. For once, a complaint from someone like Marcus, a high-ranking officer, had been taken seriously, and that gave hope to others who had never felt heard before. Whitmore begins to change. Daniel Whitmore didn't say much after the decision was announced. He left the station quietly that day, his badge still on his belt, but his heart heavier than ever. At home he sat alone in his living room for hours, staring at the wall. He thought about the past few weeks, about the traffic stop, about Marcus Ellison, about all the people he had pulled over in his long career. Had he really done the right thing every time? Or had he just followed what he thought was right, without ever asking why? That night, he made a call he hadn't made in years. He reached out to his old mentor, Captain James Rivera, now retired. They talked for over an hour. Rivera listened, as Whitmore shared everything: how he had always believed he was fair, how he had trusted his instincts, and how this whole experience had shaken him. Finally, Rivera spoke. "You're not a bad man, Dan," he said. "But you've been looking at the world through old eyes. It's time to see with new ones." Whitmore didn't answer right away. Then he asked, "How do I start?" Rivera smiled softly. "You listen more. You question yourself more. And you stop thinking that being right is the same as doing right." It was simple advice, but maybe the most important one Whitmore had ever received. Candidly, Marcus becomes a symbol of change. Inside the Internal Affairs office, Marcus Ellison stood by the window, watching the city below. The hearing was over. The decision had been made. Now came the hard part: making sure this wasn't just a moment. Making sure it became a movement. Reporters called him constantly. Local leaders wanted to meet. Even the mayor reached out. But Marcus stayed focused. He didn't want to be a hero. He didn't want to be famous. He just wanted things to get better. So he agreed to speak at a community town hall. It was held in a small neighborhood center. People filled the room: young and old, black and white, families, students, even a few officers who weren't sure they belonged there. Marcus walked up to the microphone. He looked out at the crowd. "I'm not here to blame anyone," he began. "I'm not here to tear anything down. I'm here because I believe we can build something better. Together." He paused. "For many years people have told me their stories. Stories of fear, of unfair stops, of being treated like suspects before being seen as citizens." He took a breath. "But I also know that change starts with honesty, with listening, with admitting when we've made mistakes, and choosing to learn from them." There was silence, then slow applause. Not loud, but real, because for once, people felt like someone was finally speaking for them. New rules for a new day. In the weeks that followed, the city began to make changes. Thanks in part to Marcus's leadership and the attention the case had brought, the police department introduced new policies. All officers would go through updated training on racial bias. Body cameras would be worn at all times during traffic stops. Citizens would receive clearer information about their rights during police encounters. A new community review board was formed, giving everyday people a voice in how the department operated. None of these changes happened overnight, but they happened because one traffic stop had started a conversation that couldn't be ignored. A quiet moment between two men. One morning, a few months later, Marcus walked into the police station. He passed the front desk, nodded at the receptionist, and headed toward his office. As he turned the corner, he saw someone standing near the lockers. It was Daniel Whitmore, back from suspension, clean-shaven, dressed in uniform, looking tired, but ready. Their eyes met. Whitmore gave a small nod. Marcus returned it. No words, just understanding. Then Marcus kept walking. Whitmore watched him go. For the first time, he didn't feel anger or shame. He felt something else, respect, because he realized something important. Marcus hadn't used his power to destroy him. He had used it to teach him, and that meant more than any punishment could. What happened next? Over time, things settled. The headlines moved on. New stories replaced the old, but the impact remained. Young officers started asking questions. Older ones began rethinking their habits. Community members began showing up at meetings, and slowly, trust began to grow. Was it perfect? No. Were there still problems? Of course. But there was progress. Real progress. And that mattered. A story that matters. This story, the one about a racist officer pulling over the head of internal affairs, might sound like something made up, like a movie plot or a TV show. But it wasn't. It was real. Well, sort of. Because while this exact case may not have happened exactly this way, stories like this happen all the time. Every day, people are stopped unfairly. Every day, lives are changed by a single moment. And every day, brave people stand up and say, "This isn't right." Sometimes those people wear badges. Sometimes they don't, but when they speak up, when they fight for fairness, when they choose truth over comfort, that's when real change begins. And that's what this story is really about, not just one officer. Not just one complaint, but about all of us, and the choice we make every day to treat each other with respect, no matter our race, rank, or background, because in the end, justice doesn't come from laws alone. It comes from people, from choices, from moments, from stories, and from the courage to tell them. Would you like me to combine all 5 parts into a full story file, PDF or Word, or continue with another story title?